Are you frustrated with the existing screenwriting software options that are designed to be a formatting tool and not much else? Well, don't you worry because screenwriting just got easier. Arc Studio actually understands how screenwriters think, so say goodbye to archaic, outdated screenwriting software and hello to advanced story building features, industry standard automatic formatting, and stress-free collaboration tools that are as easy to use as Google Docs. Arc Studio offers a completely free plan, and you can get $30 off the Pro plan if you visit the link in the show notes or head to arcstudiopro.com/booby. That's BOOBI for breaking out of breaking in. I repeat, for $30 off, visit arcstudiopro.com/booby. On with the show.
Hey, I'm Christina Rhea, and welcome to Breaking Out of Breaking In, a practical filmmaking podcast about taking your creative career into your own hands and making great work that gets seen without playing the Hollywood game.
Or at least while changing the rules. Hi, I'm Brie Castellini, your other co-host, and today we are continuing our craft mini-series. Today, talking to Edward Hong to discuss voice acting. Before we dive in, we do want to plug our new free monthly newsletter, which you can find at the bottom of breakingoutpod.com. Definitely go get in on that. It will not only remind you when new episodes have come out, but it will also give you a little spark of creative inspiration every single month. But with that, hello, Edward. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what your craft is that we're here to talk about today?
Yes, in a nutshell, I'm a film, TV, commercial, theater, and voiceover actor. I've been acting in Los Angeles specifically for 12 years now. Feels like a lifetime ago at this point. Voiceover has been a relatively new venture. I've been doing this professionally for about 3 to 4 years now. With the pandemic, the increase to focus on voiceover increased dramatically because of how pandemic has shifted how the industry was working. And since then, voiceover has become a very dominant aspect of my life. I mean, like all the other career aspects are still very much there, but voiceover, I think it just shows you that there's so many more opportunities than I've ever imagined than in television, film, and commercials and whatnot. So yeah, and other than that, I am the owner of 3 cats. I have an obsession with Cinnabons, and I am the founder of the PGM VO list, which we will talk about shortly.
Yes.
It's a great segue because that was my next question. So please tell us a little bit more about the PGM VO list.
The PGM VO list started out actually at this point almost exactly 2 years ago, right around the height of the pandemic when it first started. It came a month after, like, what sparked it off was the global Black Lives Matter movement and the George Floyd murder and the conversations that was happening in our lives and in the entertainment industry about representation, about proper and authentic representation, and just like the, for lack of a better word, the injustices and the inaccuracies in what we see in entertainment. And so it got to the point that it started being discussed in the voiceover community, which was just like having the right actors represent the characters that they were portraying. One of the most famous ones being like Apu from Simpsons, Cleveland from America, who's a Family Guy, and having like not white actors voice these characters, but like the right actors do these things. And so the database came out because there was just the questions were flying out. I was like, well, okay, if that's the case, where do we find so and so actor? And I've always found that question a little silly because I knew most of these actors. I knew, okay, if I wanted, like, if you wanted a black actor or an indigenous actor or an Asian actor, it was like I knew them. But it was always interesting when white people were like, I don't know them. Who are they? They don't exist. And so the idea was just to create this database, which was at the time just a Google Excel sheet. I had no idea what the heck I was doing. I was just like, here's a Google Excel sheet, here's some stuff to fill out. And it was open sourced. It was like anyone could fill it out at any time. So I just put it out there on Twitter, and all of a sudden, I think because the conversation about representation was so hot that the data, that's just the Google Excel link just got shared like crazy. It was just like all over the place. People were just putting their information in, and then about a week or two later, my agency, my voiceover agency, Atlas Talent, got really involved in it. They're like, hey, you know what? Let's send this out to all the casting offices and production people we know. And so it got its start from there. And then it I felt like it just like escalated like each time where it's like after it started like 6 months and then kind of like simmered down a bit. And then like 2021, it just picked right back up again because when I upgraded it, I changed from Google Excel to Airtable. And then when I had other team members brought on board because they were like passionate about what I was doing, that it just started like next thing we know, we just started getting more and more companies and more people to get on board with it. So where we are now, 2 years later, we have over 2,000 global majority actors. I'll get into what that is, but global majority people basically means people of color. It's a new term to say that as opposed to having people of color, which still centralizes white as the universal standard, but global
Mhm.
majority gets rid of that. There's 2,000 people who are on the database, and we have over 250 production companies, casting directors, and talent agents who use it. Most recently, the last week alone, we had Pixar and Lucasfilm come on board to use the
Wow,
database.
it's awesome.
And that is where we are
That's
now.
amazing. Wow, congratulations. So,
Yeah,
is there
and thank you.
yeah, definitely. So it started as just like an open source. Add your name if you're, a person in this industry who fits these demographics. Is there any level of like curation now? Like, is it what are you doing beyond just like having this list? Like, are there profiles? Are there plans for profiles? Like, what's next for this organizational system?
Yes, especially when once we got into Airtable and then once we noticed how many companies were jumping on board, we weren't exactly shunning away people who like we're not this list is not just for people who are veterans of that. Like we do welcome people who are just starting out in industry, but there is a certain criteria where it's like you have to have some idea what this industry is. Like if you're just like, hey, I'm curious about voiceover and I'll just put myself in. I'm like, no, you have to have some idea, like, having a website, having a demo
Mhm.
reel, not putting your Instagram handle as your website. Like, these were the
Oh boy,
basic
yeah.
Mhm.
criteria. And then I would have the ones that I would just flat out reject. Like there was one person who was like they they put their ethnicity as indigenous, but then their nationality was white. They just put Caucasian. And I'm like, okay, I think you missed the point in this. And so, because the thing is, like, I made it very clear, it's like, this is not for white European actors. And I know, yes, I've had many, many criticisms and lash outs and complaints on social media how this list is racist. It's like, you're
Mhm.
excluding
Sure,
white
yeah.
people. And I would
A
say
real shame.
it's not racist because number one, you that's not what that word means
Right.
because it is designed to give spotlight on folks that are usually underrepresented.
Yeah, and excluded.
And
Yeah.
so, you wouldn't say the same thing for women initiatives or LGBTQ initiatives. That's their own specific communities. So if a
I
man
mean, they
goes
do.
like, "Oh, I
I
feel
mean, they
excluded
do,
from
but
this
yeah.
women only initiative," I'm like, "Well, that's because women are underrepresented in the film industry, and this is supposed to give them the spotlight. So you're fine. You're honestly
Mhm.
fine." And that's what I would tell anyone who feels like they're feeling left out. I'm like, "No, honestly, you guys are fine." And yes, we're getting all these companies, and it's great that all these companies are, curious about us and they're requesting access to the database. That does not replace hard work. It doesn't replace doing classes, workshops, networking. Just because you're in this database doesn't mean you have like you're set. Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get all these additions from all these companies out. Not all the time. A lot of these people on the database, sometimes they don't get anything because it's like they either don't have the right materials or they just, when they listen to their demo reels, it's like, yeah, this person's not anywhere ready yet. They know the technical the do house and they have training, but it does take a while, as we know as artists, that you know not all of us are ready yet. So
Mhm.
that's been the journey of it. And where we continue forward is that now we provide free workshops for all our participants. We are applying for grants. And I'm just saying this here, although we'll officially say it when it comes out. We are in the process of becoming a nonprofit organization. So that is the next step forward in terms of where it is organized.
Amazing.
So
Great.
there's me, there's 5 other people around the world that comprise the team of the PGMVO list. And so we have collaborated with the SAG-AFTRA organization, with QueerVox, which is the LGBTQ voiceover database, as well as they have their own nonprofit organization. And so we collaborate with them and like other organizations like Voices of Color to see how we can make things accessible for more like underrepresented voiceover actors. So it's
Mhm.
becomes more of a not just us, but a community-based initiative to see how we can make things more accessible and better for all.
That's amazing.
That's wonderful.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Breaking news. Well, so I'm glad that once again you've given me an incredible segue. So you're offering workshops now. You were talking about how important training is. So I'm curious for you, as someone who's acted professionally for 12 years and presumably did a lot of training before and during that, have you taken voiceover specific classes? And can you tell us a little bit about that and how developing that muscle maybe was a little bit different or not?
Yes, I do think taking voiceover specific classes is important. I do also believe that in terms of what's a transition from that works well is that if you especially come from a theater based background, it does lend itself easier to voiceover because especially for animated projects, they encourage actors to kind of go big, go like, have
Mm.
fun with it and
Sure.
just go out there. And while uh, typically for American on camera acting, they tend to be very naturalized, like very mumblecore. You see it, like very like
Mhm.
Yeah.
naturalized NCIS acting or like very mumblecore indie kind of acting, which works great for that format, but it doesn't work all the time for voiceover because you have to be
Mhm.
more than that. So anyone who comes from like a really long theater background, you're actually in the ballpark to do voiceover great. Now, you do have to keep in mind that, voiceover, just like any other type of acting, there's like a million types of genres, like, and some of them just stick with that genre. Like some of them just do like infomercials or commercial acting, voiceover acting, or they do even like the text to speech things, or like, when they're like, press one if you want to talk to this, press two. There's
Mhm.
someone doing that voiceover and they're getting paid
I've
money
done
for
that
that.
before.
Yeah. And so there's a
There's a real estate agency in Florida
yeah,
that has my voice in their voiceover machine.
it's a particular skill set. It's like, there's a skill set for that. There's a skill set for dubbing. There's a skill set for looping, which is like, anytime you watch a movie, all the little random like background noises, that's people doing voiceover stuff to do that.
Mm.
And there's a skill set for that as well. And so I would say you have to look into what are you most passionate about. Like if you're passionate about, oh man, I want to voice like cartoons and all that kind of stuff, then it is important to take like animation specific voiceover classes so you know what are what are you getting at, and like when you do a slate, what's a proper slate, or when you do takes, how many takes should you do, and how varied should each take be, and also
Mm.
like what's like proper microphone recording, because like you have to be very conscious that you don't blow out your sound. You also have to be very conscious not to make sure your sound isn't too muted. So there are so many technical aspects that it is very important that actors do know about these things. And the good thing is, like, if you're a SAG-AFTRA member, SAG-AFTRA Foundation does provide free classes on technical workshops like that. So if you want to learn how to edit your audition, or you're learning about how to do audiobooks, SAG-AFTRA does offer free resources on that, which is wonderful. But then there's also a bunch of other classes like voiceover camp or like voicecaster. They offer classes and workshops how to teach you and all of that. So I always encourage actors that if you don't know, what classes, if you're wondering if you should take classes, yes, you should take classes at the very least.
So for you then transitioning out of film and theater and television, what were some things that maybe surprised you about like training for this new medium? Like were there things that you found you were really good at, like the theater thing you were talking about?
Yeah.
Were there things you were like, oh, I didn't even realize I needed to think about that?
Yeah, when it came to the theater thing, it worked well with a lot of these animated animation or video game projects where it's like, okay, so one edition I literally just got today, which is like it's for a video game, and you're like a Fire Lord dragon, And so it's just like have a menacing voice, but it doesn't tell you like deep register or higher. It's just like dishing out of like possibly thousands of people to see, if one of you get the role. The one area that's still, very, very tricky for me is commercial voiceover acting because it requires a very specific tone of voice where it's naturalized, but it still needs to sell the product, but it still needs to be friendly, but it can't sound like a spokesperson. So there's all these different things where I'm like, I have not mastered that yet, and it's not really a focus of mine. Commercial on camera acting is a different story for me. Like a lot of these commercial auditions is just like stare at the board and be amazed by this burger that just floated in midair. And that's your audition. Like you stare at a burger for 5 seconds and they're like, cool, thank you. And then if you get it, cool, you get potentially, if it's a national that runs well, woohoo, like $30,000 to $40,000 over 4 months. That's like the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, they don't even air the commercial. So I think the theater world lend itself well to a lot of the editions I get, which is the cartoons, the animated, the video games, and recently a lot of actually the on-camera experience, like the more natural experience, lends itself well to what's been exploding nowadays, which is dubbing, because there's like Disney Plus and Netflix, especially Disney, they're going cuckoo over cocoa over cuckoo puffs over dubbing and buying international content, and therefore they want English dubbing to happen for all these things, as well as all the other languages. So it's becoming more and more popular that dubbing is becoming a mainstay in voiceover, to the point that SAG-AFTRA just created a dubbing department last year to recognize that, oh, this is more popular than we thought.
Yeah, so you've done dubbing for, did you do dubbing for Squid Game? Is that right?
Yes, I did.
So tell us about that process. How did that audition work? How do you prepare differently for a dub where you're sort of lending your voice to someone else's existing performance?
So the hilarious thing about dubbing is whenever you do a dub project, you don't know what characters you're dubbing or even what lines you're doing until you show up at the studio.
Oh wow.
You got to be
Oh my gosh.
you got to be a master of cold reading, because I always ask,
Wow.
why can't we get the materials in advance? And there's always a strict NDA policy, so they never want to give that out to the actors. You just have to go there and just, do your best. So when I did Squid Game, like I've done a bunch of other like Korean drama dubs before that. It was just like any other dub. Like I didn't think anything much of it, and neither did the director. It was just like another Netflix project. And so when I auditioned for one of the side characters, which is the one I ended up doing, which was so when I showed up at the studio to record it, like I noticed that, oh, this is interesting. They haven't even finished filming the show yet. We saw all the green screen, and you saw all like the
Wow.
rough footage, and it's not done yet. And we're like, oh, that's interesting. They're like, yeah, Netflix is really trying to make this like a big thing. So I'm like, okay, so Netflix definitely wants to pay attention. They want the world to pay attention to this. They must see something in this. So as we were like recording it and seeing, as we know, all the terrible games that was happening, I was like, I have a feeling, especially where we are right now in the pandemic, this is going to hit something. I don't know what it is. It's going to do something. And we were right. I mean, like, I think at that point, people, Hollywood was like, let's have more lighthearted content like Ted Lasso and that kind of thing. And then Squid Game, give you the most depressing, look at the world and how socioeconomic crises have led people to do the most desperate things possible. And it exploded like crazy. And so that project specifically made the world pay attention to dubbing.
Yeah.
Yes, we knew about dubbing through, let's say, if you were into anime, like, about the dubbers there, but that's like a very niche market. Squid Game made dubbing into a national conversation where like we were being interviewed, like the dubbing actors were being interviewed by Huffington Post, NBC, ABC, Entertainment Tonight. It was crazy. Like, and it got to the point that the studio had to step in and be like, hey, no more interviews until we have an idea what the hell's happening, because sometimes it was not the actor's fault. They would say things that it wasn't like a diss towards English dubbing. They were just saying how difficult it is to like maintain a Korean authenticity to the English language. And the fans on Twitter like took that as a sign. It's like, oh, they're saying that the English dubbing sucks. So
I
yeah.
remember this.
So it
Mhm.
just kind of like went out of control there. As we all know with social media, you say one thing that wasn't supposed to be harmful at all, and then just like woohoo, it goes to somewhere else. And so I saw it as a yes, it was terrible, but it was a sign that people were actually paying attention to English dubbing. And so I
Mhm.
think because of that, Netflix went even harder and bought a lot more content, not only from Korea, but from all over the world. And same with like Disney's doing a catch up game right now this year. And so I think it's just like they're taking it more seriously and they're putting a lot more money and resources to make sure that the acting is good, that the lip sync is good, and everything, it feels like you're watching it like as if it was the original product itself, but in English or whatever language that you were watching it.
It's funny because I didn't really pay much attention to dubbing before, but my mom, she growing up, we would always watch Bollywood movies, and so we would watch with like the subtitles on, and dubbing wasn't ever really an option there. But now she watches everything with dubbing and with subtitles on, and so she watched all Squid Game with the dubbing on, and we started talking about the show even before that kind of blew up as a conversation. And then I was reading your posts about it, and it was so interesting, particularly the craft piece of it, of like how you have to match lips, even though you're speaking a totally different
Yeah.
language. And so, could you talk about that a little? Like
Yeah.
how does that work on the translation side and on the performance side?
So there are several processes to get through that. So it's like, okay, so they have to translate it first, like the raw translation, the literal translation of what the original language is to whatever language you're uh, going into. So so we'll start with English. So you translate to English. That's the translator's job. And then there's the adapter job. And the adapter's job is probably, I would say, the hardest job because it's like you take the translated thing and then you look at the mouth flaps of the actors and you have to match it. So sometimes they change the words so they can match what's going on. And a lot of times what gets sacrificed is accuracy of
Mm.
language. So it's like if you see people complaining all night, like that's not accurate at all. Why would that person say that in the English dub? It's because it was changed to make the mouth flap match happen better. And so there's a lot of times where that gets sacrificed. Now, what I've been advocating for is, and I've been privileged to have some opportunities, is that I do advocate for more people behind the scenes as the adapters, as the directors of these English dubs. Because let's say if it's a Korean drama and the director, the ADR director is Korean, they can look at something that's adapted dialogue and they're like, okay, that's not right at all, like not even close. So let me try to rewrite that to make it more in line with what the original actor is saying.
Mm.
Like I was able to earlier this year direct a Disney Plus show, which will come out soon. The feedback I got from a lot of actors I hired, and all of them were Korean or was to understood the language and was like, okay, this is, that's not right. We'll change this, or keeping the mannerisms of how they talked. Because a lot of times, like I see it not just with like, Asian shows, but like let's say an Italian show where, Italian people act very differently from American people. It's a culture. It's like it's very different. So I remember seeing a dub scene where like they were on a beach and there's all these bros and they're all Italian bros, but the English dubbing made them sound like, like Californian surfer bros. And that's
Mhm.
not how Italian men act. So it was very jarring to see the animated, like, they're being very animated, but the English dub was like, yeah, bro, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, that's terrible dubbing. So it's not just like ethnicity, which is also important, but it's also just culture too. That I think it's
Mhm.
like a lot of times the directors or they don't pay attention to the the mannerisms of how each country talks and be very particular about that, and also get actors that understand that well, because like I said, there's no preparing for dubbing. You're just being thrown into it. Now, if we
Mhm.
were prepared for it, sure, we could get actors who don't understand the culture necessarily to do it. But if you get an actor who knows the language, who knows the culture, and you have them dub, they have a much higher chance of getting it within a short period of time. And so I
Mm.
think that's been my thing with, especially with dubbing. And especially like there's a lot more Bollywood films that's actually becoming dubbed into English because now they're
Mhm.
taking now I think like what Hollywood is paying attention. There was a recent movie, they're like, oh, maybe people do like Bollywood. It was the RRR movie that just kind of like came out of
Yeah.
nowhere and just people are like, whoa, Bollywood movies are awesome. I'm like, yeah, they've always been awesome. You're only
Yeah.
just paying attention to it now. So with that being said, they are looking to English dubbing for these Bollywood South Asian projects. And so I think that's where it's like having the right actors is
Mhm.
essential because they understand the nuances of how these actors talk and then just try to see if they can replicate that into English, which sometimes it doesn't work because English is a limited language and it doesn't have the same, let's say, the beauty of like French, or it doesn't have the same nuances of like Mandarin or like Korean. Like it just sometimes it just doesn't work out like that. But
Mhm.
you do the best you can when you understand it.
I'm curious from like a performance perspective when you're dubbing, are you just really trying to match the performance of that particular actor, or do you try to bring any of your own choices to it? Do you have the ability to do that?
For the most part, your job is to honor the original actor's performance. You're not trying to,
Mm.
it's kind of like the best in the theater way, in the theater performance comparison. It's like you're the understudy. Your
Okay.
job is to honor the original actor in terms of even like as technical as the steps. Like everything they do, you do it as well. So that when, if they're watching your performance, they're not going to be thrown off by like if you had to step in last minute because the main actor got sick, they're not going to be like, oh, what's going on right here? And you're still honoring that. And you're not like messing up, like in terms of your positioning, so that the light person has to like shine a spotlight you at this moment, at this time right here. It all works out. Same thing with dubbing. You do your best to match it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's like you have to exactly sound like a person. Sometimes
Mhm.
like companies really do care about that, like they care about that the main lead sounds exactly like the original actor. uh but the thing is like everyone's voice is always different no matter how similar it could be. So I think more importantly than the vocal match is to have the performance like mirror that. Like if someone
Mm.
is a very high strung neurotic person, you want an actor who can like match that as opposed to someone who
Mhm.
can't do that.
Sure.
And so when I watch it, I think like especially for live action dubbing, like it is very imperative for all dubbing actors to pay attention to the body movements and like the posture and like are their eyebrows up the whole time? Are their eyes like bulging out the entire time? That tells you where that actor is at that current moment. So you as the actor replicate that. So if it's like okay,
Mm.
his eyes are bulging, so then you'd be like, okay, he's probably like wired out, so you're gonna give a
Mhm.
wired out performance. And then the director can like modulate that. Sometimes the director might have a very bold choice to be like, you know what? Let's go a little crazier. Let's go a little this. Like I know with one of the project that I did, the main lead male actor had no acting range whatsoever, which was very frustrating for the dubbing actor because it just sounds like a monotonous droll tone the whole time, which was not intentional because the original actor has never acted before. He's a pop
Mm.
star.
Mm.
So, acting that was his very first acting gig, which woohoo, what a great privilege. But in terms of the dubbing actor, at some point I was like, you know what? Give me a little more. Like just a little more, but not too much because we can't betray the facial expressions. Like it's not that animated.
Sure.
So you can give a little more without making too much that it wouldn't make sense that would come out of someone's mouth and facial features like that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. It's like exercising a very different creative
Oh
muscle
yeah,
from
absolutely.
acting on your own. Yeah.
Do you do the motions sometimes or like do the bugging
All of
eye
it.
to like
All
get
of
in
it
that
helps
place? Yeah.
so much. Like even like to the point like if my character is like showering in a scene, I'll put my hand up so then just it can hopefully like translate into the microphone that if I'm showering, like scrubbing my hand and like really focusing I'll just do that like and then just like I'm scratching something because like the character is scratching something in his head, or like if it's an action scene where the character is in a high tense situation, he's pointing a gun at someone, I'll point my fingers at someone like this and be like, and then like really tense my muscles so that the tenseness of my body will translate into the microphone as well. So
Mm.
I also encourage all my actors to go as physical as possible. Some things you don't have to do, like you don't have to exactly jump up and down, or like you don't have to clap because we don't need any of that. No clapping because you already have the clap sound effect in the original audio. But if it's like oh yeah, there's one where they were all part of a boot camp, so they were all doing push-ups. I didn't have the actors actually do push-ups, but it's like do all the heavy breathing that comes with push-ups. Like,
Mm.
uh, one, like do all of that so that it actually kind of like tricks your body in your mind to think you actually are doing push-ups because you're hyperventilating. You're like, doing all these breaths. So it lends itself to the vocal performance. And a lot of times, you know, all of the added efforts makes it feel more real because if you don't have any of that, it feels very static, which is why like watching dubbing in anime can be challenging because anime does not have a lot of vocal efforts because it's not live action. It's like, it's just
Sure.
drawn, that kind
Mm.
of thing. And a lot of times that kind of projects where they don't have those attention. So when you do the English dubbing, it can feel very static. Like you're just listening to it. You're like, oh, it seems like it just feels static. Sometimes they will challenge that and be like, let's add some more efforts so that it feels like a little bit more naturalized, which I noticed is the more recent trend in terms of making
Hmm.
feel like, not so weird when you're watching something dubbed.
That
Mhm.
makes sense. How do you know how much of like production sound ends up having to get re-recorded so that like Foley matches? Because I imagine, it's not like all sound in a movie is made later or is dialogue. So like, is there like a separate Foley artist team that basically has to recreate production sound to go along with dubbing? Do you know?
In dubbing they call that M&E, which is music and effects, and most of those, for the most part, they are kept in. Like the original is kept in for that, and
Mm.
depending on the studio and the network, they'll have the dubbing actor, actually do that. So if it's like a fight scene where it's like you're getting punched or you're like throwing someone over, they're gonna have you do that. They're gonna have because it's like
Oh
how
wow.
you're grunting will sound differently than the original actor doing a
Mhm.
grunt. So they're like, okay, but sometimes they're like, okay, we don't necessarily need the actor. Like if you're like brushing your teeth and you're swallowing water and you're gargling and you're spitting it out, we don't have the actor doing that because also it'll be very unhygienic to do that in a sound booth. So you don't have
Sure.
to worry about that. Kissing sound effects, sometimes the actors will have to do that where they have to. And so the weirdest trick to do is just like kiss like your hand and just get real close to the mic, and then that's the kissing sound effect if you're kissing someone. There are projects that I've seen where it's like, especially like the more explicit projects where it's like, okay, they will tell the actor if you're auditioning for it, hey, if you book this project, you're gonna have to make those sound effects, those explicit noises. So there's always, thankfully, a warning disclaimer if you want to do that kind of project, or if you're not comfortable with that, don't do it. So those sound effects you do have to make when it comes to like other things like I said, clapping or the punching sound effect, or like any other sound effects you hear that's not from like a human mouth. They'll keep that from the original into the English dubbing as well.
Yeah, I'm just imagining what a nightmare that must be for the sound editor to try and make
Yeah.
it match
Oh my
and not
god, that
sound
would be
like it's being
crazy.
recorded in 8 different places. Oof. Yeah, I've edited enough ADR in indie projects to be like never again. Uh, so I'm curious about the audition process because we've been talking about that a little bit, and you mentioned demo reels before. So what is what are the differences in the audition process for voiceover from live action self tapes?
For the most part, it feels like you're sending it out into the void because there's never a feedback. It's you just tape it, in your whatever, whether your closet or if you have a booth, and you just record it, edit out any like weird, like if there's like a lot of like mouth clicks, you edit that out, and then you make sure you have your slate, you turn it into an MP3 file, you send it to your agent, and then that's it. Like there's no like there's no feedback from the casting director like, oh, that was good, now do that again, but do it this way instead. You'll never get that feedback, so you just do it and hope for the best. And if you get a callback, great. And if you get a booking, awesome. More often than not, it's just silence, rejection. Like
Sure.
I can definitely, like, I remember when I did stats for my first 3 years of voiceover, like I would get an average of, let's say, 200 to 250 additions a year for voiceover from my agent. And one year I got one project. The next year I got zero projects. The year after that I got one project again. 2021 was 19 projects. That was like,
Wow.
woo! And then,
Wow, yeah.
yeah. But then I realized that once you get to the point where, like, once it starts hitting, the voiceover community is so tiny that this year's work that I've been getting, it's all from people I worked with last year. It's just, they're like, oh yeah, I thought of you. Yeah, yeah, let's have you in for this and that and this and this. And I know that's a case for on-camera acting as well, but the industry is just that much tinier in the voiceover
Sure.
community that once you getting good with a director, they're like, oh yeah, I really liked your performance, then they'll just think of you for something else, even if it's like, oh yeah, I just threw you in for like talents person number 4 and he's just yelling. All right, cool. And then you get paid whatever rates that is, and then you're like, cool, you didn't have to audition for that, you just got it because they thought of you, which is always nice when people think of you for these things.
Yeah.
So that's just what it is. It's just you turn it to MP3, you send it into the void.
So for when cutting a demo reel, because like I've been racking my brain since we booked you for this interview about like, because we've talked about making film reels before, acting,
Yeah.
directing, and that kind of thing. How do you choose and keep like engaging a solely like audio reel?
Oh
How do you
man.
differentiate between
Oh,
projects? Like, yeah, talk me through this.
oh my God. Okay, so it can be very, very daunting for voiceover because it's like, once again, considering how many genres they are, which means that you have to like make different types of reel. Like, so I just have a
Sure.
Mm.
character reel, which is because that's basically what I'm focused on. But it's like, if you want to do audiobook reel, you have to create an audiobook reel. If you want to do a commercials, you have to do a commercial reel. If you want to just focus on video games, that's actually a specific thing, a video game reel. And people go, well, how do I create this if I never booked any of these projects? You have to, if you're a very good audio engineer, if you have actually like some engineering experience, you can do it on your own, which you can technically do. Like, there are ways to learn it on your own thanks to YouTube. You can literally teach yourself how to do it. Now, if you don't have the patience to it, which most of us don't, because time and money, is that you do have to find like a good demo reel service, and they create
Okay.
it for you. So they'll have a consultation with you. They'll see what your voice is like, what are you into, what's your character type and all that. And then they'll prepare you some scripts, and they'll be like, hey, do you like these scripts for this? And then you record it. And then they'll like edit it for you, and then they'll show and they'll give you the reel, and you send it out to demo agent, voiceover agents or clients or production companies, in the hopes that they will hire you or bring you on board as a talent. So the best demo reel services, unfortunately, are very expensive. Like, I can see them; they go up to like $1,000 to $1,500 for one demo reel.
Oh my
So
gosh.
it is voiceover like career. That's why we created this database, and also the initiative to help out actors, not just with workshops, but also we look into grants and even doing giveaways, so that we give out like $200 or $300 gift cards to Sweetwater or Guitar Center, because getting good voiceover equipment is expensive. And for a lot of
Mhm.
marginalized communities, that is not an option. And so, like, when I look into, let's say, the indigenous community, a lot of indigenous community folks do not have access to this kind of equipment because it is not anywhere near something that they even would think that's a viable career option. Because if you think how many, let alone not even voiceover, just on camera roles for indigenous actors, it's tiny. So it's like they're really, for a lot of them, they don't have any reason to do so. But then I always do encourage that, if there is more of us out there and we are shown that we do have good experience and or good equipment, then there's a reason to hire more. Because if it's like, oh, we are looking for indigenous actors, but we only found like 5 in SAG-AFTRA, because it's like it's such a tiny, tiny force in terms of like what's out there. So I think a lot of it is just like, it is important to have this equipment, but also like teaching people that there are ways to providing good auditions and good, recording experiences. Even if you don't have much in your home, as long as you have like pillows and blankets and like, a decent mic that you can probably buy on eBay for like $50 or $100, you can make it work. And then as
Hmm.
time goes on, you can always improve that when, you're able, hopefully be able to book products that pay you the money.
Totally. So when you say you have like a character reel, for instance, is it a lot of just sort of like single lines of you doing different voices? Like, and it's just sort of a montage? Is it like you say, this is from this project, and then you do the voice? Like, what is.
People think automatically it's like, oh, do like 50 million different voices and put it on your demo reel. From what I'm hearing from companies, especially like Pixar, is that they don't want that. They do want range. They do want like, if you can do it. But I think they're more interested in like, what are you as a person? We do want to see your acting range, like, like that kind of thing. And the same applies to on-camera acting as well. Like, yes, actors think they're like, oh, I'm gonna play this person, and then I'm gonna play a clown, and then I'm gonna be this, which, yeah, sure, you could show you how, wild range you have,
Versatile.
but it doesn't help a lot of casting because they don't really get a good sense of who you are. So they do want to see like, okay, this is a dramatic scene, this is a comedy scene, and this is you being like, a gruff lawyer, and this is you being like a lovable dad, like, but it does have a consistent through line of like, what kind of personality are you? The same
Mm.
applies to voiceover as well. And just because, let's say, you can't do impressions, and people think voiceover is like, yeah, give me an impression of so and so and so and so. That's not most voiceover actors. They, for most part, they are terrible impressionists. They cannot do impressions, but they are able to give convincing character performances. And I think more and more animation companies and video games are looking for like, well, who are you? Like, I'm not interested in like, oh, you being like, oh, I can voice like a 10-year-old girl or whatever. Like, they don't want that. They want you to be like, who
Mhm.
are you as a person? And if you have the range of like, oh, if you can sound like a grandpa, great. And if you can't sound like a teenager, awesome. So I see it for especially a lot of women identifying actors, they have their reels. It's like, okay, this is their normal range, like how they sound every day. And this is them as a 10-year-old girl, or this is them as like an 8-year-old boy. Because I do notice that like if a company can hire adult female identifying actors to voice boys, they'll go for that, because if you hire an actual kid, you have to hire a studio teacher, and that's expensive.
Yeah.
Uh,
So if they can get a female identifying actor who can do an amazing 8-year-old boy voice, they'll go for that. So that's a tool set to have. Like, how do you sound like an 8-year-old boy? That's a particular skill set that voiceover actors need to learn, so that it helps them increase their chances. And so, back to your question, character reel, it doesn't necessarily need to be a crazy montage, but just enough to show some range, but more of a consistent through line of who that individual is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I
yeah.
imagine it very challenging and irritating
Oh yeah.
sometimes. Figuring out, all right, which evil dragon video game guys should I choose for this moment? um I'm stuck on that. I can't wait to hear what your evil dragon man is. So you kind of already mentioned this a little bit, but are there misconceptions from actors in other disciplines, do you think, about the voiceover industry? What are those? Let's dispel them now.
Oh man, many. Uh, I Now that I've really got into the voiceover industry, like I have noticed that out of all, like especially on camera, like if we had to compare on camera and voiceover, the voiceover community is easily more shafted by like everyone. To the point that you see it in the Hollywood movies too. Like the most recent example I can think, and I know the voiceover community is very, very like passionate about this. They're making a big screen version of the Super Mario Brothers, and Chris Pratt is
Mm,
I know
voicing
where you're
mhm.
going with this.
Mario. That was not received well by the voiceover community. That was
Nope.
yeah, it was very, yeah, it was not pretty for, the voiceover community, because first off, you have the original Mario actor Charles Martinet, who is still part of the movie, but he's additional voices. He's doing the side characters. And everyone's going, you're telling me this guy who's been voicing Mario for like at this point 30 years now is now just some side character, and you got Chris Pratt doing Mario. he's gonna do an Italian accent. He's gonna that's what he's gonna do.
Is he actually going to do an Italian accent?
Well,
I forgot. I
he just
didn't
made
know
an
if they
announcement. He's like,
confirmed.
"Get ready, guys! It'll be a voice like you've never heard before." And I'm really worried about that now. I'm like, what does that mean? I'm very
is it bad
nervous
that I'm
now.
excited?
So
I'm mad about it, but like, if he's gonna do it, I want to hear a Chris Pratt Italian accent.
So I'm just like, okay. So, but then the thing is, like, sometimes celebrity hires can work well, like, when they give so much of themselves and it's a good performance. Like, I would say recently, the Sonic the Hedgehog, Ben Schwartz did a great performance as Sonic. I did especially like they brought the original Tails actor, Colleen O'Shaughnessy as Tails, and I was great. It was very, very appreciative that they brought a voiceover actor to do that. Idris Elba, you can't go wrong with him. So it's kind of like he was great as Knuckles. So those are the cases where it can work, but I can give you so many other cases where like, oh, that sounded terrible because they don't know how to voice act. They don't know how to give a full range to it. And so you can tell by how flat it sounds. And, that's the celebrity hire. And I think that unfortunately, a lot of these movies and even like TV shows are being so bogged by celebrities that they're not looking into these talented voiceover actors who have done it for decades, or longer, and they don't give them that shot. And then they go, well, they're not a name actor. Well, yeah, they're not a name actor in the bigger world because you don't put them at that position. It's like the same thing for we experience it on camera acting for like global majority people of color actors. When people go, oh, there's not enough famous, let's say, indigenous actors or Asian actors. I'm like, well, yeah, because you don't give them the opportunity. It's all about opportunity. And because the thing is, like, they're worried that they're going to lose money. And I always go, well, you're losing money no matter what. Like the Lightyear movie that came out, that underperformed.
I was wondering if you're going to bring that up.
That underperformed tragically. Like, it was supposed to get like $70-80 million opening, but it ended up with $50 million with a $200 million budget without marketing. And you had Chris Evans as the main actor. If Chris Evans couldn't sell you the movie, oh man, then it tells you that, celebrity hires are not something you should look into. The only person maybe people can argue that celebrity hires might work is Tom Cruise. And that might be about it.
So it's really interesting that we're having this conversation right now about craft, because I think that's kind of what it comes down to, is that a lot of media companies, especially in this day and age, treat making films and TV like a business and not like an art form. But what they're forgetting is that the reason that their business is successful is when the art form is treated well.
Yes.
And so when they try to skip the line and say, oh, well, this person is famous, so let's just put them in there, not because they're the right choice, but because we think people will buy tickets because of the fame, they forget that the reason this person is famous is because they were in good works of art.
Yes.
And it's like they're the same thing, Hollywood. It's so irritating. What do you think that, like, we as a community of artists, as a community of people who watch art, like, what do we do when these Chris Pratt stunt castings get done? Like, how do we train Hollywood to remember that craft and art is as much of a like function of their successful business as, name dropping?
I think we're already kind of showing that. It's like we just like, when I see that, like, this is obviously a stunt hire, or obviously like, something that wasn't really, this was more of a money move, is just to not watch it. It's to not support. Or if you are going to watch it, like, I use other people's accounts when it comes to certain streaming accounts. So it's just like, we all do it. And so it's like, I don't want to like actually or pay for it. But then, I also don't want to give it the view on its opening weekend. So then I'll just wait like 2 months or 3 months later. And then I'll be like, all right, I'll check it out now.
Sure.
Because everyone's very focused about the opening numbers. So I think
Got it.
Number one is to support what you think is good. Like, if it's indie art form, if it's movies, like, I supported a crap out of Everything Everywhere All at Once. Like, I was like, that kind of movie is awesome.
I've seen it twice in the theaters, and I don't see movies in the theaters anymore. It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of movies where it's like, the creativity, especially like how, they have all these great actors, but it looks like when they did all the production design, it looked like, someone who was having a field day at like the Kitty Designs, like, making all these little
Yeah.
artwork, or like their version of the future, which was just basically like in a van, and they put some like aluminum foil on themselves. And I'm like, that's great. It's like really bad cosplay, but it's awesome. So
They committed
they
to
committed
it.
to it. And I
It's
think that's what is missing for a lot of these big budget films. Not to say they aren't committed, because there's so many people that work on these movies, not to like,
right.
shaft on them. But I think it gets lost that, they think that putting all this money into something that with all these special effects is the answer to, making, what will tap into what people want. And I think what people want is gonna be the creativity of like that kind of movie, or or when it comes to voiceover, seeing those kind of animated projects that pushes the boundaries of just like, what is storytelling. So I think it's just supporting that. Like, you watch it on TV, you watch it in the theaters, and you put your money into what you think that the people should pay attention to.
Yeah, I think that is important. And
Yeah.
let's zoom out. I'm just curious now, Edward, to hear from you about like interesting things that you have experienced as an actor, both live action and voiceover. Just like talk to us about acting. What are the things that like you nerd out about when you are preparing for a performance? What got you into acting? Like, this is the craft episode. Let's get crafty.
What got me into acting, especially as a kid, as a high school, I was a excessively emotional kid. I had no filter. And so I think acting felt like a natural thing to just get into. It was like, oh, there's something I could just kind of go crazy over, and it's totally okay to do so. Woohoo. So acting was something that I got into in high school and college, and then like, then obviously continued. I go characters that are a little bit more off kilter, that are a little bit like, okay, there's something going on with them, and then just like, especially when they go on crazy journey and paths that is fascinating. So for me, the horror genre has always been interesting for me, because we see more of that. We see more, like, the craziest things possible, and
The
in that
extremes.
kind of format. And so the horror genre has always been interesting, and dark comedies are always my jam, because it's just like, I don't necessarily like lighthearted haha sitcoms thing, because I think life is so much more messier than that. So when I see a good dark comedy where it's like you're laughing ha ha ha, and then like something really tragic happens, and you're like, oh my god, oh, I don't know how to feel about that, and then something crazy happens and you're laughing again, and then you're just thrown into a roller coaster all over the place, which is basically what life is. It's a roller coaster. So I think for me, acting has always been kind of a vessel into tapping into that. And it feels great. It feels great to do that. And so that's why theater, especially, has always been my first love. And it will still be my love, because it's like I've had the privilege performing in shows, performing 5 days a week in front of crowds of like 500, 600 people each night. And just like the thrill of just performing like 7 to 8 shows a week, and not knowing if each show will turn out well, if the audience will even like it, if they're going to react to it well, or if they're going to react very viscerally to it. You just never know. And so on camera acting, voiceover, all of that is awesome and fun. But theater, like, for those who have experienced it, just the thrill of, just putting on the makeup and then just getting ready behind the scenes, hearing the audience come in, and then all the bustle and all the murmurs, and then it gets quiet, and you go on stage. And then what's even more fun is when someone completely fucks up their line, and you're like, oh shit, how do I save that person? Or even better, you're the person who fucked up. They're like, oh shit, how do I get myself out of this? At that moment, it's the worst feeling in the world. But when you look back at it, you're like, I went through that. And that's something that with filming, it's like, yeah, you mess up, you just do another take, that there's that. But when you're on the stage and there's people just staring at you, and you messed up that line, and you just kind of stand there for a little bit, and you're like, oh shit. And then some part of you is like, oh, I hope someone saves me. And then when someone does save you, you're like, oh, you're an angel, you're an absolute godsend. Those are the moments I live for. That's what I do miss about it. And so the problem with theater, especially in LA, is that it is so underpaid. It's very hard to do theater because especially
Mm,
now that with the pandemic, cost of living has gone up. So it's like the idea of doing theater just doesn't seem that appealing. You're gonna spend all this time driving, and now especially what gas prices being like almost $6 what per gallon.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It's like
yeah.
traveling back and forth to rehearsals just it's becoming more of a privilege. And it's like even like when people watch Broadway, it's like, how does anyone watch Broadway when all tickets are like $200, $300 at the cheapest? Like, how do you watch
Yeah.
it? How do you possibly
You win the lottery, but that's also a privilege because you have to be able to get up, wait
yeah.
for it,
And
like be
stand around,
available,
yeah.
stand around. Like I won the Hamilton lottery, and the only reason I got that is because they made the app finally because it was too dangerous for people to queue up. So like I eventually on the freaking app finally got it, but like if in most theater performances don't have that kind of infrastructure, so you do just have to stand around and wait for it.
Yeah. So anyway, back to I go off on tangent again.
But the things that we're excited about, that's what we're
Sorry,
focused on.
theater is got me into it. A lot of my training was theater based, doing a lot of scene study classes, and it's something I still enjoy very much to this day. Voiceover is just another avenue, and I think for actors or for artists, it's like it's great to have as many avenues as possible. And so recently, now doing directing for Disney Plus shows, I recently did casting for some voiceover projects, and so it's great to do other things that's not just acting, because there's a certain joy in like being able to do the behind the scenes process of like being able to have a say in these matters, especially for me in terms of representation. So like the latest thing I cast was a Vietnamese Sundance film called Micah, and we had 90% of the voiceover cast, the English dubbers, the Vietnamese, and like one person was like Chinese. So everyone was Asian, but we had 90% representation on it, which like helped the project immensely, because when the director, who himself was Vietnamese, like if they didn't understand the direction and he would ask, hey, by any chance do you speak Vietnamese, and they say yes, okay, let me give you this direction in Vietnamese, and then all of a sudden they would just get it. They would just be like, oh, it
Mm,
tapped into something very specific and cultural
yeah.
that way. And then the director was like, ah, there it is. He was like, I wouldn't have done that, been able to do that, but non-Vietnamese person.
Totally.
I was just gonna say, since we're talking about that from the directing side, because we've talked a lot about the acting side, can you speak to any differences in terms of directing voice actors versus on-camera performers?
The only experience I have is in this case the dubbing thing, where it's like it's a very specific thing, because once again, like we were talking about, you have to honor the original actor's performance. So a lot of
Mm,
it is just like you watch it and then you see the actor do the thing and try to guide them so that it matches as best as possible to the original performance. And what I've noticed is that like with a lot of on-camera actors, they get very shy in front of the microphone. Like it becomes even more muted, where to the point I can't even hear what they're saying, and I would have to remind
mm,
them, hey, this is your kingdom, this is your booth, your world, like live it, like live in it, like really like push yourself out there.
mm.
And I'll let you know when you're being too loud, because I don't think there'll ever be a concern. And then there'll be some like theater actors where they're like, all right, you can tone down the volume a little bit, but good, I want that energy. I can just do a little bit less. It's so much easier for me directing actors to do less than to do
Mm,
more, because yeah, to do less is just like, yeah, just turn off the faucet just a little bit, and that's good, they have it. But actors who you have to tell them to do more, it kind of feels more challenging, because it's like you have to crank it up. Like if they're not that like emotionally available, or like full of like like this, it's really hard to get them there. It's like and the thing is, like, I also have to be very considerate and careful, because I know in the past teachers would be very abusive about like how like, oh, you're not giving me the traumatic pain, I'll give you trauma, and then they'll do like the most terrible shit. We are
oh
not
my god.
That's not what we do in terms of any
Hmm.
kind of acting. So it's just simply, look, if an actor can't get there, you do the best that you can, and then but do give them a note, but like, hey, this is something I want you to look into. It's just like, like at your own time, at your own pace, like being more emotionally accessible, or like being able to be more angry. Because like sometimes I'll tell actors like, no, this is rage. Like, this is like Korean rage. This is not like, oh, I'm mad at you. Kind of like, no, they're like, veins are coming out of their neck. They're like, they're ready to fight over something really stupid. And for people who have never experienced that kind of anger, it's like, hey, look into it. And if you don't want to look into it because you get very uncomfortable with it, that's okay too. Because then there will be actors I've worked with where it's like they have been like that in their past life. Maybe, when they were in their 20s, they're like, I never want to be there again. That's fine. So I think as a director, you have the responsibility to guide the actors to do, what your vision is. But also, I think, especially in the conversation we're having in this day and age, is to acknowledge them as human beings, and you have to be considerate about particular pressure points, especially for whether it be for people of color or for women. That there are some things that you can't just say like Cavalier-esque and be like, yeah, I'm gonna say it, ha ha ha, this, and not realize that you said something very traumatic. And so I think it's just like, as it's a, and I know, there's a lot of older white men that complain like, oh, it's so hard to direct or do comedy these days. And I'm like, no, you just have to be more aware of your world. And I think we've been so used to like, this is the way it's supposed to be, where there's no consideration whatsoever. It's all for the arts. Yes, I know the art is important, but in the end, it's like we're dealing with human beings. And I think thankfully the conversation because of 2020 and with the Black Lives Matter movement, which has gone into the Me Too movement and all of that, that the art form is not just about like getting the best performance possible, but getting it within like with compassion and understanding of everyone involved, not just your actors but your crew members, treating them well. And we've seen like really bad instances of like mismanagement of crew, as we've seen with the Rust incident. So it's just like all these kind of things do come into factor of like, as especially me as a director, like if I feel like I'm like, really making an actor uncomfortable, I just have to step back and reevaluate. I'm like, hey, all right, what can I do differently? Because this is not working. Let's work something out here. As opposed to insist that you're shoving a square peg into a triangle hole and be like, this will work. This will work. And it's like, no, you have to like maybe, take a breather and reevaluate what you need to do.
It's really important. It's about the collaboration. Like, I think a lot of directors consider themselves like dictators of the set. It's like, it's my way or the highway. Like, you get mad at the triangle hole.
Yeah.
Even though you're the one with the square peg. So I think that's a good reminder for everyone. I'm curious, now that we're just sort of talking about acting, what are your opinions on, and what are some misconceptions about method acting? Because I feel like I've read a lot of things about how there are different kinds of method acting, and the kinds that we think about are actually not really how it was original. Like, I don't know. What's your opinion on method acting?
So unfortunately, I think we were mentioning Jared Leto, that people like Jared Leto has
what made me think
ruined
of it.
the name of method acting. And I think the method acting that he's doing, that, where it's the crazy kind of acting, is specifically the American kind. It's the American kind, because method acting, when it first started, it's not what people think it is. It is about like, because especially when it was created by like Stanislavski, the second part that everyone forgets about is imagination. It's like, sometimes if you don't have to physically like make yourself go through it, it's like, yes, it can work. But then he does talk about, which everyone forgets, and that's always like the forgotten part, which is the what if scenario, which is like, imagine it. Let's say if that doesn't work, try this way. And I think American actors have gotten so obsessed with just the first part, which is just like, you really got to live through it. You really got to like go through the pain, or, become a drug addict and really shove those heroin into your arms, that kind of thing. Like, go through all of that. And I don't take any stock into it, because I think, number one, it is psychologically damaging. It is physically damaging, especially depending on what you're doing to yourself. And number two, no one's going to care. Like, when I saw, especially like all the preparation Jared Leto did for the Joker in like, Suicide Squad.
Suicide Squad.
He was in it for like 10 minutes.
Used condoms, etc., etc.
Yeah, he was in it for 10 minutes, and I'm like, I don't see any of what you're talking about. I just see, you did the Joker performance, but you could have easily done that without doing any of that, and I would have still believed that you were a crazy person, like, you were someone, that nature. And so I think for me, it's like, yes, commitment is important. Like, I don't want you to give me a half-ass performance, but like I think it's also a very male thing to do because like Viola Davis is also a method actor, but she never talks about her like, oh, I did all of this and all of this. I think it's a very male tendency to talk about method acting and all the things they do. I've never seen a female identifying actor do that. I think it's a very heterosexual male thing to do where they just like spread open their legs and be like, yeah, I pooped on myself. Yeah, like, just something ridiculous. And so I think number one, method acting is incorrectly mislabeled. Number two, American method acting is terrible and people should stop. And number three, it's a very male thing to do. So for men, you can just shut up about it. Like, even if you're doing all that, even let's say you're doing all that crazy stuff, who cares? Like, it's you just in the end, did your performance translate? Like, when we watch it, was it a good performance? Good. The end. That's it. And I think it's just like, unfortunately, and I'm guilty of it myself as an actor, we like to expound on like the inner process of acting. And I do remember like there was like a moment where Al Pacino said like, someone was complimenting Al on like some performance he did. And I might be mistaken. It was him or some other actor, but basically a very well-esteemed actor. So it was like, he was very like, intense in his focus. And people are like, oh, what were you thinking about? And he was just like, I was just thinking about hot dogs. And I was really hungry. And so when I looked at the camera, I was just thinking about hot dogs. I was just like, man, I would really want to go for a hot dog right now. And they're like, really? It looked like you were like so much longing, so much passion, so much like, pain. Yeah, hot dog, And I think that was kind of mind blowing to me because it's like, it doesn't have to be a traumatic like thought. Like, it doesn't have to be like, oh, let me think of the time my sister passed away. I'm like, oh, please don't do that. Please don't do that. Just think about something else. You can think of, you don't even think about puppies dying. Like, you don't have to do that either. You can just think of something that makes you go, oh man, something you really long for, and just make it work. And so I think,
right.
I think this day and age, when people say, oh, they're complaining about, oh, so and so, or you can't do this, you can't do that. I say it's a challenge to be more creative. So like with comedy, people say, oh, I can't make fun of minorities and women anymore and gay people anymore. Like, okay, but there's plenty of comedy where it's like has nothing to do with that. Like, since the beginning of time, it was always about like, what was always funny was punching up, making fun of corporations, making fun of billionaires. That was always funny. There was never like, that has never stopped. So it's just like, those things can remain timeless, and other things you just have to find a way around it. And if it means that you weren't able to find comedy, that means you were just a terrible comedian in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that a lot of times, especially I think the people who complain the most are the people who are like successful. And what happens when you get successful is that like what oppression means to you looks very different. And so it starts to feel like anytime someone says you can't do something, that feels oppressive, rather than when you had less and an actual systemic power was bringing you down. Now it's like, I'm above everyone and I still feel oppressed, but the magnitude is completely different. And actually, I'm not being oppressed at all. I'm just not allowed to do literally whatever I want anymore.
Yep.
And so they think they're fighting the power because they've forgotten what power actually is, because they are the power now.
Yep.
Ridiculous people. Absolutely ridiculous. So final question. Are there any tips or pieces of advice that we haven't gotten to yet that you can share with fellow aspiring voice acting professionals?
For voice actors, especially if you're like, you're just starting out, you have no idea about anything, you're like, I don't know what to do, is that there's a great actor, D. Bradley Baker. He does a lot of great character voices. He created a blog, which is the most extensive research I've ever seen. It's called iwannabeavoiceactor.com. And if you just type that in, it's just this amazing blog of like everything you want to know, like, what kind of equipment should I look into? What kind of classes should I go for? What kind of genre should I tackle? Any questions you can possibly think, he covered it. And it's free. It's a completely free resource for anyone to use. So anytime people are like, oh, where do I start? Check out the website. And then, it's a really long read. It'll probably take you days to go through everything. But that just means D did a great job in covering all of the essentials. So I want to be a voice actor.com, which is also very easy to remember. I want to be a voice actor.com. And then I tell actors to go for that. And then also from there to always look into opportunities when it comes to training, connect with your fellow colleagues. There's other great, like, especially for voice actors, Discord has become like their main communication method. So there's like places like voice acting club, or casting call club, or that kind of nature. So it's just like starting with those kind of resources will be a good start for aspiring voice actors.
Amazing. Well, yeah, we'll make sure to capture those links and everything in certainly the Patreon bonus that'll come out next week, everybody. But we'll definitely pick one or two to add to the regular episode notes.
Great.
And what about you and your upcoming work? Anything you want to plug? Where can people find you?
It's funny with voiceover work that it's a whole bunch of NDAs. So I have a bunch of NDAs,
Sure.
a lot of NDAs coming, a bunch of dubs, and a major video game coming out maybe next year. We'll see, who knows. But in terms of on-camera stuff, I have a horror film that I'm a lead, directed by Spider1, that's coming out on Shudder August 1st. It's called Allegoria. So that is something I have coming up in on-camera world, and in voiceover world will be basically a whole bunch of NDAs.
So follow Edward on Twitter, and I'm sure once those clear,
Yes.
you will be the first to know.
Yes.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Edward.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much to Kelsey Rauber for our theme music, Kaylee Brown for our podcast art, Ezra Lee for editing this episode, and to all of you for listening. Links to learn more about them and our guest are in our episode description.
And thank you to our Booby VIPs, who are our $10 supporters on Patreon. That's Kim Garland, Amanda Blunt, Anthony Epp, Kelsey Rauber, Norman Steinberg, and Brandy Nicole Payne. If you want your name on that list, and or you want to have access to all of our bonus resources related to each and every podcast episode we post for free, you can subscribe for as little as $3 to our Patreon at patreon.com/breakingoutpod.
Or join our free newsletter where we share a new creative prompt each month. Next episode, we'll be discussing the craft of adaptations with special guests Sinead and Sean Persad. Be sure to tune in.